For my networked learning project, I set out to create 2 different watercolor pictures. My goal was to create a simple shape, I chose a leaf, and a more complex picture with 2 different foci. I chose a hummingbird with fuchsia flowers. I had no previous knowledge of watercolor, and I utilized many sources from the internet to learn this skill. I used WikiHow, adventuresinmaking.com, watercolorpaintingandprojects.com, and multiple YouTube channels, including The Frugal Crafter, Cheap Joe's, Angela Fern, Nancy Quick, Alfonso Dunn, and The Artist Chronicles. In order to meet my goal, I had to master using the right amount of water on the brush. You can see here several different techniques that I tried and the notes I took. The next step I did was to try a wet-on-wet approach, since I frequently had my brush too dry. I also practiced a variety of other techniques and played around with painting before I began working on my goal. Last week I met the first part of my goal. More can be seen about that in my blog, Adventures in Watercolor. After a bit more practice, I sketched my hummingbird and began to paint. I had to remember all the techniques I had learned about how much water to use and how to mix colors. In this project, I used a wet-on-wet technique for the body of the bird and made sure that my brush was wet enough so I could pull colors from the concentrated area to an area of lower concentration to get the desired effect. I continued to use my techniques, moistening my brush when needed and trying to blend the colors, but one of the biggest things I struggled with through this project was visualizing what the end product would look like. I learned that in watercolor you have to accept some level of imperfection. It's a lot of trial and error and making sure that you're just moving with the flow of things. It was easy to see that there was a big difference between a novice and an expert. For me, it was hard to know when to stop or when to keep going, but I had to continue to practice and work through that. I kept adding color and blending the colors I already had down. Sometimes I would add dark colors to provide more definition, and other times I would just add clear water to blend the colors I was already using. Painting the hummingbird really tested my skills at knowing exactly how much water to use and when to add more. I spent the majority of time for this picture working on getting the definition right and the color blending right in the bird. Once I was close to being satisfied with the body, I used a credit card to add additional definition by scraping and blending colors. I began to add some final details to the bird and looked back over my painting to see if I was satisfied. Watercolor painting is something that is very fluid, no pun intended, and you really have to understand when to go back and add more and when to stop. This is something that experts know better than novices because of the amount of practice they have applied. After I was satisfied with the hummingbird, I moved on to painting the fuchsias. This process was a little bit more challenging for me. I was having trouble figuring out how things were going to go together, and I tried to add in some stuff which I didn't really like. I realized I didn't have quite the level of finesse that I would have liked to get the desired effect. Ultimately, I met my goal of creating 2 different watercolor pictures. I think that they turned out nice and can see how additional practice would improve my skills.